So I have another question. Why do you or why do you not wear a mask? Now, I don't. I'll just throw that out there. And this is why. I did my research and I came across a lot of information. I was looking for scientific proof by randomized controlled studies. Okay, that's not a trends research, that's not an opinion. These are actual scientific controlled studies where, for example, they'll take, 1,000 nurses in one city and make them all wear a mask. Then they'll take 1,000 nurses in another city and tell them not to wear a mask, and they'll do that for 6 months, and then they'll come back and they'll look at the findings. They'll look at the masked nurses, they'll look at the unmasked. That's kind of a randomized controlled study. It's not a trend like a lot of like the CDC likes to use trends research. Okay, and we know that trends research can be manipulated because we've seen falsified COVID deaths over and over in the mainstream media. So one of the articles I think that was the most compelling was this one right here, and it's by Dennis Rancourt, PhD. I'm going to show you a little bit of video of him. But anyway, the article is Masks Don't Work, a review of the science relevant to COVID-19. So what he does here is he talks about randomized controlled studies, and he talks about physics and biology. And something he said here is really interesting. Furthermore, the relevant known physics and biology, which I review, so he reviews, are such that masks and respirators should not work. It would be a paradox if masks and respirators worked, given what we know about viral respiratory disease. The main transmission path is long, resident, time, aerosol particles in the 2.5 micrometer, which are too fine to be blocked, and the minimum effective dose is smaller than one aerosol particle. So really, you have to understand relative size between things. For example, in just a H2O molecule, how much space is between those particles? And I remember one of my teachers saying, imagine that a tennis ball is a nucleus. The first orbital would be, and that tennis ball was in the middle of a big soccer stadium. The first nearest electron would be outside the stadium. So there'd be that much room. So you have to kind of understand relative size to really wrap your head around this. Another thing that he said that I thought was really interesting was the present paper, speaking of his paper here, the present paper about masks illustrates the degree to which governments, the mainstream media, and institutional propagandists can decide to operate in a science vacuum or only select incomplete science that serves their interest. Such recklessness is also certainly the case with the current global lockdown of over 1 billion people, an unprecedented experiment in medical and political history. So that is just the introduction. Now here they have a video where he's getting interviewed, and you can find this article just by Googling "Masks Don't Work, a review of science." I think I just Googled, do masks work, or science proof that masks works, and I found this. So this goes on and on and on. He goes through here and he cites all these studies. Okay, he's got a bunch of studies here that he cites. At the very end, he says, furthermore, individuals should know that there is no benefit arising from wearing a mask in a viral respiratory illness epidemic, and that science studies have shown that any benefit may be residually small compared to other factors. All right. Other factors like, in my opinion, wearing gloves would be much better. And they always teach us, as a nurse, they teach us the 10 top reasons for spread of infectious disease. And it shows the 2 hands, right? There's your 10 top reasons. Boom. No one talks about wearing gloves. You should wear, if you really want to do something that's going to be effective, wear gloves. Buy a box of gloves. So here's one of the studies. I just looked at the findings and conclusions. Findings in this pragmatic cluster randomized clinical trial involving 2,862 healthcare personnel, there was no significant difference in the incidence of laboratory confirmed influenza among healthcare personnel with the use of the N95 respirator. Now, if you look at this, what's interesting about this is I've read through all of these studies, is that they're saying that if you use the N95, it was more likely that they came down with something. So that 1% difference is those who are wearing the N95. Anyway, so here's another study. Our analysis confirms the effectiveness of medical masks and respirators against SARS. Disposable cotton or paper masks are not recommended. Okay, here's another one. Conclusion. Although N95 respirators appear to have a protective advantage over surgical masks in laboratory settings, our meta-analysis showed that they were insufficient data to determine definitively whether N95 respirators are superior to surgical masks in preventing healthcare workers against transmittable acute respiratory infections in clinical settings. So they're just kind of doing the mass comparison. There was some evidence. Now, I thought this was kind of interesting. There is some evidence to support the wearing of masks or respirators during illness to protect others, and public health emphasis on mask wearing during illness may help reduce influenza and virus transmission. There are fewer data to support the use of masks or respirators to prevent becoming infected. But here's what got me. Further studies in controlled settings and studies of natural infections in healthcare and community settings are required due to better defining. So they're saying there is some evidence to support the wearing of masks, but they really need to do bigger studies. So that one is the only little bit of potential I see. Here's another one. Conclusion. Face mask use in healthcare workers has not been determined to provide benefit in terms of cold symptoms or getting colds. A larger study is needed. So they're saying the same thing. Now, I'm going to move on here. I'm just going to show you a quick video clip where I watched this video, but I want you to hear what this doctor has to say. So let's go ahead and I'll play this for you.
I am a researcher with the Ontario Civil Liberties Association, and this caused us to write to the World Health Organization, the Director General, and say, what the heck are you doing? Why are you now recommending masks? You know, forever you have been not recommending masks for use in the general public because you've admitted that there's dangers associated with that. The masks collect and gather all kinds of pathogen-laden materials near your face and eyes and nose and everything, and then you touch the mask and you touch the rest of your body. So it was thought that there was danger associated with that concentration of pathogens, and that's why the main World Health organizations did not recommend mask use in a general population, which is not a controlled clinical environment where clinicians, properly remove their masks, immediately wash their hands, and dispose of them in the proper way. To just throw the idea of masks out in the general population and even, wear whatever and so on was believed to be a dangerous thing, making matters worse. And then they abandoned that and flipped it around in the total absence of supportive evidence. They used what I call substandard science, which does not use randomized controlled trials and doesn't have verified outcomes. They looked at those articles, and there's a lot of scientists writing those kinds of articles because it's easy to write an article in a pandemic. It's easy to, the idea is during a pandemic, you should be able to get your scientific results out quickly to help. Actually, the opposite is true. That's when you don't want bad science, is when everyone's terrified and you're in a pandemic. You want to have the highest quality standards for the science that you publish and for the recommendations that you make, the policy recommendations that you make. So instead, they've gone the other way. And it has resulted in what I think is a very political statement by the World Health Organization, which unfortunately affects governments, in particular in Canada. So we felt it was important to complain about that and to point out the additional dangers to mask that are beyond what was said that they even admitted. And so we made a long list of additional dangers that had not been considered yet.
Okay, so he made a long list of dangers that have not been considered yet. And those are in this article, so you can go, I won't go through all that, but you got to do your own stuff here. But right here, they have that all listed. So now I'd like to show you, now he's talking about actual studies, randomized controlled studies with a verified outcomes, how he puts it. I'd like to show you my interaction with Panhandle Health District, because they're supposed to make a decision here about masks, mandating masks in Coeur d'Alene. So I put a quote from the article about the testing and blah, 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 and I sent that to them. Then I sent them this article, and they said, thanks for sharing. You're very polite. I said, you're welcome. I hope this helps you with your decision. I said, I would appreciate if you could show me one of this a study that shows masks are effective. Well, then they send me this. Okay. Now, this is not a study. This is a just considerings and who should wear it, who should not, CDC recommendations. They show evidence for cloth covering, but there's really, I mean, they show superficial evidence that doesn't consider how small the particles actually are. So they show a picture like here where, oh yeah, they're getting bounced off, but they're going to go straight through it. They're going to go around it. And to a virus, okay, so the edge of the mouth right here and the edge of this mask is like the Grand Canyon, really. It's not like this big huge particle and it can't get away, it's trapped. That's not the case. So this is what they sent me, and I fired back. And then, oh, hold it, they sent me another. Now they sent me this, and it's an experiment that can be really powerful to people who are unaware of the size of the particles, and it's the aerosol droplets. And I've seen this floating around, but yet still, these are not randomized controlled tests. So this is just an experiment that is extremely misleading because of the size of the particles and the air suspension time of the articles or the particles. Now, and then they sent me all this with no response. And then they sent me another aerosol kind of thing. And so I sent them this. Okay. Now this, I'll show you guys. I'll open this and let you guys watch this because, and many of you have probably seen it. But this is Fauci saying, you shouldn't be wearing a mask. And this is when they were actually telling the truth. This was back in, well, this is dated May 7th, but this is when Fauci was actually telling the truth. So let's watch this real quick.
People should not be walking around with masks. You're sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this. Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often, there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course. But
so there you go. So then I responded. I sent him that, and then I said, "Are you serious? Those are not actual studies. To have a study, you need a control group. You need a test with the verifiable results." And then they sent me another article. Still, it wasn't a study. They say it was, but it was more of a kind of a conclusion. I think it was at CDC. Yeah, CDC. So it says, and this is what they sent me. Cloth face coverings are not surgical masks or respirators. Currently, those are in critical supply, and you should continue to reserve them. So this is what they sent me. Didn't even support their argument. And then said, I would really love to see an actual scientific study that proves masks are effective in public. It's the least you could do. Do you have one? Well, then they sent me this. And all this is talking about is airborne transmissions. It's not a study. It's more of conclusions or, vector information or how the disease is spread. Identifying airborne transmissions is the dominant rule for the spread. So this is actually kind of true because what I found is that the particles are suspended in air. So it's kind of a molecular diffusion idea. So it's kind of like, if you're in your house and you're in one part of your house and your wife or whatever, they put on a little perfume, and then you're upstairs or you're in another part of the house and you can kind of smell it. That's molecular diffusion. So those particles are traveling and they're suspended in the air and they travel through the air, and then you smell them. So that could easily, that kind of represents what these particles look like. What they're saying here is the migration measures are discernible from trends of pandemic. Our analysis reveals that the difference with and without mandated mask covering represents the determinant in shaping the trends of the pandemic. So they're based on trends. This is not a scientific study. This is trends analysis. Okay. This is the type of study they use for, stock markets and all this other stuff. And believe me, it's not scientific and it falls flat on its face a large part of the time. Um, so then I just said, I appreciate your effort, but this is not a scientific study. This is trends analysis. It's quite different. And they just said, okay. And I left it at that. The bottom line is there is no study proving masks are effective against the spread of viruses, okay? And all the studies prove the exact opposite. And I'll just tell you, there's other studies. There's one that I saw that if you wear a beard, that's even worse. Okay, so I see these guys with beards and they're wearing these masks. That's even worse than wearing a mask. There's more friction. The mask will that he talked about in the Fauci, he said, oh, can things get stuck in the mask? And yes, they can. But you know what else? They flake off the mask. So I think about the people using the self-checkout stand, where I think this is probably where a lot of this stuff is getting spread personally because of this. People go to the grocery store, they're wearing the mask, and the masks are mandated in a lot of stores. So they're mandating you to spread the disease. That's what they're doing. So when you put on a mask and you go through the checkout line and you're checking out your stuff, your mask is rubbing against your face. And if you're wearing a beard, it's even worse. And those cells are it's like a cloud. Think of it as a cloud around your mask that is just tiny, 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 tiny particles. Cannot emphasize enough how tiny these particles are. And they're falling all over everything in that checkout aisle. So my advice is, of course, if you want to stay safe, wear gloves. And if you got to go to the store, don't use the automatic checkout. Stay away from that. Go and have a cashier ring up your groceries. And I don't know. I've hoped to make myself clear on how I feel about this. I want scientific evidence. Okay, that's all I'm asking for, scientific evidence. So far, even our own health district has failed to provide this. And they're going to make a decision shortly on whether they're going to mandate masks or not. And then tomorrow there's a meeting at noon at the library on masks. So anyway, I'm just trying to do my part. You guys all have a nice day.